Welcome to Turn Talks, the podcast that bridges the gaps between college and career. Join your host, Tina Fox, founder of Turn Mentoring, as she brings together corporate leaders, educators, and university alumni to share practical wisdom and equip you with confidence, clarity, and connection.
Hi, everyone. Today on Turn Talks, I'm joined by researcher and professor Dr. Dan Gullifor. We're going to be unpacking imposter syndrome on today's campuses and why structured, measurable mentorship may be one of the most underutilized tools in higher education. If you care about student confidence, retention, and scalable impact, don't miss this one. Dr. Dan P. Gullifor, PhD, is an associate professor of management and the Tyler Patterson Early Career Fellow in the College of Business at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. He received his PhD from Texas Tech University and his Bachelor of Science and Master of Business Administration from Bradley University. This fall, Dan will be transferring his talents to serve as associate professor at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We wish him well there. His research focuses on the imposter phenomenon, leadership, and self-concepts, and has been published in a variety of well-respected outlets, including the Journal of Management, Journal of Organizational Behavior, and Leadership Quarterly. He has taught both graduate and undergraduate level courses in leadership and organizational behavior. But prior to entering academia, he worked in industry for several years in both human resource management and sales. Everyone, please welcome Dan Gullifor to the Turn Talks. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Turn Talks, the podcast. My name is Tina Fox, and I am the founder and CEO of Turn Mentoring, also the host of Turn Talks, where we bring wonderful guests, like my guest today, Dan Gullifor, to talk a little bit about not only their role in this world, but about how things play into mentorship. Because as we know, mentorship is a huge part of how we all succeed in life. None of us go on this alone. And so we're bringing in Dan today because he's got a really unique perspective. So let me brag a little bit about Dan Gullifor before we welcome him officially. Dan is someone that I had met through a mutual friend. He is a professor, an assistant professor. He has been for 7+ years now at University of Wisconsin in Eau Claire. Through that, we have collaborated on some research. He's really been helping me better understand the research side of post-secondary and academia. I cannot thank him enough for his wealth of knowledge. In addition to that, Dan just recently received an opportunity at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So he's going to be leaving the University of Wisconsin and heading over to Milwaukee. With that, he is going to be doing more research, and we're very excited for Dan's journey. But he also has a little bit of background in staffing and recruiting, and he had worked in industry prior to his academic background, helping and becoming a lead recruiter. So not only does he understand hiring, he knows what it takes to get from collegiate to career. And we welcome Dan today on Turn Talk. So Dan, welcome to our show, and welcome to speaking to our guests.
Hi, Tina. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. So we're going to dive right in. You've done a lot of work in the world of imposter syndrome. Obviously, you're connected to academia and your journey into academics. What motivated you to pursue the research side? Because not everybody goes into research when they become a professor, but you've decided not only on research, but you've decided on leadership and self-concepts and the imposter syndrome, which is something that we study here at Trend Mentoring, and how to transition all of that from industry into teaching and research. So talk to us a little bit about your journey into this path.
Sure. So when I was an undergraduate, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I changed my major probably 4 or 5 times. And it wasn't until I met somebody, a mentor. I met a mentor that they were the professor of my capstone course when I was a senior, and they were just talking in class, and they were describing what they do for a living. And they asked, does anybody have any interest in doing something like this? And I said, right here. Absolutely. And so I went to their office hours and they said, all right, well, here's what it includes. Does this still sound like something you want to do? And I said, it does. And at the time, this was during one of the economic downturns. And so I was fortunate enough to have a job where I was going to be working in staffing and recruiting. And so he said, tell you what, go work for a couple of years, see if it's something you like. If you still have interest in coming back, we can connect then. So after working there for a couple of years, I reached back out to that professor and I said, hey, I don't know if you remember me. I'm still interested in doing this. I want to come back and I want to become a professor. And he said, of course I remember you. We'd love to have you back. Come on back." And so I went back to Bradley University, where I went and I got my MBA there. And my professor was kind enough to say, "If you want to be a researcher, this is the next step, is I'll treat you like a doctoral student." So instead of being an MBA student that was geared towards practice and getting ready for my next step in corporate America, he treated me like a research assistant. So I was doing data analytics and writing papers and submitting to conferences. And it's through him that I met my doctoral advisor at Texas Tech University. And he said, "Come work with me." And I worked there for 4 years. That's where I met multiple people. And ultimately, that's where I kind of found my lane, so to speak, is that I had great mentors that kind of came around and said, "Okay, you want to study this? Okay, you want to go down this path? Here's the way, here's how you go about it. Here's how you do this. How can I support you along the way?" And ultimately, the way I found the imposter syndrome is I was having very serious bouts with it. It was something that I didn't know what it was, and I was ready to drop out. I was ready to quit my doctoral program and say, "I made a mistake. I'm a fraud. They're going to find out." And I called my dad, who happens to be an academic as well, and he said, "Tell me about it." And I said, "Well, I can't do it. They're going to figure me out. I'm a fraud. I'm this big imposter." And he's kind of laughed and he said, "Okay, come home and talk to me about this over Thanksgiving." And he tells me about how his mother-in-law, my grandmother, gave him a book. And it was the book on imposter syndrome. And he said, "Read this. Then if you feel like you need to quit, you can quit." And it gave me the strength it gave me the ability to see what I was experiencing, how real it was, and gave me kind of the strength to kind of get back up on the horse. But also, if this was something that I was ready to quit my career and everything like that, I figured there must be a ton of research on this in our field. There wasn't. And so I said, "Okay, I think I can do this and I could spend a lifetime researching this kind of a topic because this is fascinating to me." And so that's what I've been doing ever since that day. So that's kind of how I got into this.
That is so cool. So, okay, I'm going to back up for a second because I'm going to get to the imposter syndrome because that is the core of what you study.
Mhm.
But what do you think made it so that these people came into your life, like that professor who said, "You know what? Why don't you go do that for a couple of years and then call me back?" Which, by the way, fortune is in the follow up. So good on you that you were so adamant about the follow up 2 years after the fact. But what do you think it was about you that allowed these people to be able to approach you and come into your life? Because I think there's a lot of people in our audience that they're like, "That's so nice that you just had these mentors that came into your life, but I don't have that." So what would you say what vibe were you putting out?
Honestly, it's something that I would not say that I was putting out any special vibes or anything like that. I would classify myself as at the time I was a pretty average student. I was not somebody who was exceptional, particularly dedicated. I was a B's get degrees kind of guy. And so it wasn't anything that I was special. Honestly, what I would say is that I noticed the timing and I realized that this seems like this could be something. There was an instinct that this person has extended a hand to me. And it's like, if I don't take this, then where I can't wait for another hand one day. And so I think that was part of it. But also I think in terms of why were they willing to come to me, I think part of that is, and I have no problem openly admitting, I think part of it is just privilege. I think I am a very privileged individual, right? I am a straight white male from upper middle class America, and there's something to the idea that mentors, and there's this attraction similarity principle that the people that are very high up are products of their past, and in the past, individuals that were white males got ascended into higher positions. And so I think the fact that I happen to be one, it made that bridge a lot shorter to cross. And so for me, it was I really think that I'm very fortunate in that manner. And I owe so much to my mentors, not just my professor at Bradley, my professors at Texas Tech, professors here still today. I think that that's a big part of it.
Well, first of all, thank you for opening that can of worms because we are going to go there. And I think that that's well, it's very brave. But what I was going to say that I noticed, and I think it came through in what you just stated, is you have a humility about you, and I think that that is attractive to people who are in a position to help. You also, if B's got degrees and you're a regular guy, you are somebody who seems to be very open to listening. Your timing was certainly good. And like I said earlier, you did the follow up. You actually went out and you did something. So doing is half the battle. But I think it's very, like I said, brave of you to open up this can of worms and say, hey, listen, I know where I am in this world. I know that I receive certain things. My starting line might be a little bit more ahead of somebody else's starting line.
Right.
So, you talked about this imposter syndrome that you faced.
Mhm.
And you've published on this work. I know that you just went last summer overseas in Europe to go talk with a bunch of other researchers on the imposter syndrome. How would you explain this concept to students and faculty who still think I'm the only one who feels this way? You opened with the fact that no, I'm one of you. I get it, and this is why I started researching this after I read this book, and it brought me some level of connection in the fact that it exists outside of me. So how do you explain this to others?
Yeah, so I think the first thing I would tell you is if you're experiencing it, you are not alone. You are not in the minority. You are in the clear majority. That our estimates as among all the research that we've done is that anywhere between 70 to as high as 84% of people experience some bout with the imposter phenomenon at some point in their life, right? 70 to 84%. Okay. So honestly, if you're experiencing this, take comfort. You are not the only one, right? If you're worried about being in the minority, you'd be worried that you're not experiencing it ever. But in terms of what is this, it's the clearest way for me to be able to explain it is it's just a function of the self concept discrepancy, right? So when we think about ourselves, the way we define imposter syndrome is just simply it's the feeling of intellectual fraudulence where you think that you've tricked other people into thinking that you're more competent than you actually think yourself to be, and you fear being found out. That's it. Now, to understand it, it's this idea of self concepts. So, on this side, you have your other self concept, which is what it is that you think other people think of you. And this one is your own self concept. This is what you think of you. And essentially, the phenomenon is when these things become decoupled such that the other self concept, what you think others think of you, is more competent than what your own self concept is. And the further apart they get, the more intense the experience. If it's just a little bit of imposterism. Moderate levels, high levels, right? And that's really all that it is. And so the question is, how do you push these things back together to where you think you get more alignment, that your perception of what others think of you and your perception of yourself are more in alignment? And that's really how it is that you kind of resolve this discrepancy to minimize the experience of the imposter syndrome.
Gosh, that's such a brilliant way to describe even with the hand signals. I've never heard it described in that way and that separation space.
Yep.
So I've been through 360-degree feedback at corporate
Yep.
America, which that's, on one hand, something that is terrifying because you're just waiting to see what the anonymous feedback is from everybody who's surrounding you in comparison to what you think you're doing on the job. What is the trick? What are some of the things that you've been able to do for yourself or that you've seen in research or in that book that you read, which by the way, we'll have to get the name of that book and that author because I have to drop it into the lines below. But
Yeah.
how do you close the gap on that imposter syndrome if somebody's feeling that way?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of ways, right? So there's really two, because there's only two aspects of it. There's really only so many approaches that you can take, right? Now, what's funny about it is that usually this other self concept is usually tied to other things that are going on, right? We form our opinions and we form our perceptions based off a lot of other external cues, right? So some of the times when you're most likely to experience this are when you look around and you see things like, I just got promoted into this position. People must think that I have these abilities, right? I was put in charge of this project. They must think I can do this, right? And so that kind of helps shape this idea. And then the fact that we don't have the matching competency in our mind, well, we have to find ways. The more productive and healthy way is to ultimately pull our own self-concept closer to the other, right? Because the alternative is, which is frankly a little bit easier sometimes, is the idea that we can hack away and try and manage impressions to pull it down so that the expectations that others have for us more closely align with our diminished self-esteem, essentially. And so really the more productive ways to do it are to do things like engage in things like mindfulness. Think about things like, okay, when was the last time that I experienced this? Did I get discovered as a fraud or not? Did I make it through? Right? If I did get found out, was it as bad as I thought? Maybe you look around and you think, okay, does everybody expect me to truly be perfect? Or is it okay for me to be, you know, competent in one area and grow into the things that maybe I think that they expect me to, right? There's a lot of perspective taking that goes into it. And how can you do that, right? The old adage is fake it until you make it, right? Which is
For that.
okay, but which is okay. And I think that's a really good short-term solution. But I think the fake it till you make it thing over an extended period of time is likely to end up, experiencing things like burnout, right? You're
Yeah.
going to be what you do is you'll tend to overwork, and when you overwork, you end up not only, yeah, you're probably going to meet the expectations, but the thing about the imposter syndrome is on the back end, your mind tricks you into saying things like, I just worked hard. It's not because I'm actually competent. Anybody can work this hard. There's really nothing special about me, right? And it's very easy to twist yourself into thinking that, to where essentially you never accumulate any evidence that your success is because of you. And that's the key, is you have to give yourself permission to say, you know what? There are a lot of checkpoints and a lot of places that I could have been discovered as not being competent. We took college entrance exams, we took classes, we took hundreds and hundreds of hours of classes. We,
Mm.
went through all these licensures and certifications and something. Nobody's flagged it. And maybe we need to start listening to those people and not ourselves and these biases that we let bounce around in our head for so long.
I love the comment accumulation of evidence. And you're absolutely right. As students are going through their primary education into their post secondary education, for some, there are a lot of measurements. There are quizzes and there are tests and there are SATs and ACTs and there are capstone projects, and you're given a grade. And so when you meet a grade, there is that accumulation of evidence. And then you get into the real world and you're not necessarily getting that same accumulation of evidence that you're used to. And so
Hmm.
there is this, well, what should I be thinking about myself? And yeah, I can see. So I get that. And there was a word that popped up in my head when you were saying that you could either start chipping away at it and moving towards what it is that you believe others to think of you and why you got the job. Or you said that you could also start pulling them down to this concept of self that may be a little bit more limited. And when you did that, the word that came up in my mind was sabotage.
Hmm.
So
Yep.
is sabotage something that is coincided with imposter syndrome? Do people actually start to pull people down to a level where it seems manageable because it's easier to stay here in where I'm used to versus stepping up to what I could become, the potential?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I described myself in the beginning about how I was experiencing this. I was ready to drop out of my program, right? I was ready to simply quit and walk away. I was in my first semester, I think it was, and I felt like such a fraud that I was starting to look up moving companies and things like that. And then, I talked to my dad and he said, "Hey, is it because your grades aren't very good?" I was like, "No, I've got A's in all of my seminars." "Is it because you're on a research project? Did it get rejected from a journal?" I said, "No, it actually got an R&R. It's actually going pretty well." "Okay, you went to a conference. Did people kind of, rip into you during your presentation or something?" I was like, "No, they were actually pretty complimentary. They thought there was a lot of promise in the work." And it's like all this evidence that's out there, but you get in your own mind of this idea that
Mm.
this potential outing as some fraud is just would be so catastrophic that you can do the mental gymnastics to make yourself seem like this is, it's not because of me, right? I've just been fortunate. I've been lucky. It was originally identified among high achieving women in academia back in the late 70s by Clance and Imes. What they found was that they said that these women that despite exemplary records, that tons of publications, fellowships, course evaluations, all of these things, getting tenure, that no matter what, they never attributed their success to themselves. They always said it's because I had a great mentor, I worked hard. Anybody in charge of that project would have been successful. It was destined for greatness. It wasn't because of me. And when you constantly do that and you constantly externally attribute your success, you never amass that evidence that I actually can do this. I am competent. And so yes, people opt out. They pull themselves from positions and being considered. One of the things they do is imposters engage in this thing called self-handicapping behavior, right? So the idea that before you go out and give a speech or take a test, right, everybody goes, well, how much did you study, right? And the imposter, even if they studied, would say, oh, I didn't study hardly anything, right? I didn't have time. And essentially what they're trying to do is lower the bar for themselves. Makes it
Hmm.
easy. They try and diminish the chance that they might fail and be found out. So if you lower the bar for yourself, you're more likely to clear it and not be discovered. And so they engage in impression management tactics like that all the time.
Wow. So if I heard anything, ladies, be discovered. Is what I heard.
Yes.
Go the exact opposite. The study that you mentioned in the '70s of these
Mhm,
women in academia, I think that there was a more modern version of that because I was reading it years ago from, HBR, Harvard Business Reviews,
mhm,
where they were I'm not gonna get it exact, but I'm gonna paraphrase here. They were looking at 10 qualifications for a job, and they did this thing between men and women, and when men met 2 of the 10, they applied for the job, and if women met 8 of the 10, they did not apply for the job because they were missing the 2. So, decades later, we're seeing this whole new phenomenon, or I guess the same phenomenon happening in new ways through Harvard Business Review. So that's just really
mhm,
interesting that this continues to go on. I think that might be another podcast as to what it is that we're teaching young girls. I think it's gotten so much better over the decades. With every decade, we stand on another level of shoulders, right? And we are
mhm.
seeing ourselves move forward, but the numbers aren't necessarily panning out as far as pay grade, as far as titles, as far as board work.
Yeah.
So that's another talk for another time. But let's talk about the fact that, you and I, we do work in mentorship. You do a lot of work in imposter syndrome. And I'm so grateful for the work that you do with us here at Turn. But how could mentorship help with this feeling of the imposter syndrome? So, everything that you've researched, everything you've seen coming out from Turn, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So there's an article that just came out fairly recently. I think it was 2 years ago now at this point that it came out, where they kind of reviewed what are some of the interventions that you can have to kind of help address these various things, and to address the various experiences that you might have as a result of the imposter phenomenon. And the two main categories that really came out of it were the idea of having kind of support groups, right? Kind of the peer support, and recognizing the idea that, okay, there's other people that are experiencing this. Oh, so you go into a doctoral program, usually you come in with a few cohort mates, and you realize as soon as somebody opens up feeling this way, other people do, and you realize, okay, we're all experiencing this, we can normalize this experience a little bit and maybe even lean on each other a little bit here to make sure that when we're kind of having these struggles, we're not alone.
Yeah.
And then the second one is this idea of having a mentor or a coach of some sort. And when you have a mentor or a coach, one of the things that's very negatively correlated with or negatively related to the imposter experience is age. As you get older, you tend to start to amass more evidence. You start to realize, okay, I've gotten this far and nobody's found me out. The odds of somebody finding me out are going to be pretty diminished, right? That or the idea of oh, I'm old enough, I don't care anymore, right? But the idea
I'm
is
feeling
that
that sometimes. Yeah.
oh, me too. These college kids keep getting younger. But no, so what you do is you have a mentor who, as you develop this relationship and this back and forth, you develop a higher quality relationship, one characterized by trust and vulnerability. And so when somebody's experiencing the imposterism, the fear of exposure is one of the biggest drivers of our behavior. And you only are willing to admit this potential feeling of imposterism when you have a sense of trust that nobody's going to exploit you or find you out or anything like that. And so when you have a mentor that can say, hey, I have experienced this. Hey, I have gone through these exams. I have gone through these really hard labs. I have done whatever it is that you're going through. They've shared the experience and they can tell you, you were just like me. I made it through. I know you will. Here's the things that I did that I know you can do. Here's resources that I know that I have that are available to you that weren't available to me, right? And so many of these things aren't things that are just easily found in handbooks and manuals and instruction packets for for your career, right? These are only things, these are tacit pieces of knowledge that are not codifiable in YouTube videos and Reddit message boards. These are things that are unique, tailored to you, that somebody can help you through that experience. And that's what's so powerful. I am a product of great mentoring from people at various steps along the way. And I wouldn't be here without those people mentoring me. And I can attest to that.
Yeah, bringing up that whole part of, we are so well connected today with Reddit boards, with YouTube videos, with social media. But at the same time, we see on college campuses this concept of belonging. And how can you be in a snow globe as beautiful as a college campus with people that are experiencing the same thing that you're experiencing with all these layers of support from career services to your classwork to, extracurricular activities? You've got lots and lots of support, yet we still have a high mental health issue that continues to plague college campuses, and we have a low sense of belonging in this perfect snow globe. So, what would you say to colleges who do offer advising and they offer counseling and they offer all of these things, but how can a structured, mentorship model continue to support all of the services that are on a college campus? I mean, you live it every day. You are working with students every single day. What would you say from a faculty perspective that could help your other faculty and leadership members across the United States as far as considering structured mentorship and scalable mentorship on their campus?
Yeah. So I think to answer the question, I want to go back to the comment that you made about how we're more well connected than we ever have before.
Yeah.
And I think that that's true to an extent. I think that we have a greater quantity of connections that we have. I wouldn't necessarily say that we have a high degree of quality connectedness anymore. And I think part of that is because the ease of the quantity of those connections is so prominent, right?
Mhm.
It's very easy to just go on, send a text. It's very easy to just Snapchat. It's very easy to do this from your couch, Netflix, whatever. It's very easy to do those things, but to still satisfy that kind of immediate urge for connectedness and that need for belongingness. Okay. But we are social creatures. We are meant to be around other people. If you didn't learn this in COVID, that's one of the biggest takeaways ever. I'm an introvert by nature and I thought I'd be thriving. Even I wanted to be around people more often, right? But when we talk about the need for mentoring, the mentorship is not necessarily just a simple quantity ad, it is a quality ad. Okay. When we talk about, do you have advisors? Yeah, they probably have multiple advisors. They probably have career advisors. They probably have academic advisors, right? They maybe have access to counselors and things like that on campus. They have all kinds of access to all of these individuals, right? But when we talk about mentoring, the return on mentoring is from the unique connection and the relationship that you form between mentor and mentee. That is what it is. You get to know each other through iterative interactions, through discussion of values. What are perceived strengths and weaknesses? What are your goals and aspirations? What are your biggest fears, right? And it's only through these conversations and trying to truly understand who the person is that you get the feedback that you truly need to hear. Not just, does this check the box? Does this satisfy that initial urge of saying, yes, they talked to somebody, but just because they talked to somebody, does that mean that they were heard? Right. And
Yes.
so for me, I think the mentoring piece is so critical in today's day and age because it's very tempting and easy to find other things to check boxes on that make it seem like you're satisfying that need. And I think that that's what's so critical. And that's why I think that's why I'm so thrilled to be a part of it, is because I think it's satisfying an urge and a need out there that is just, it gets kind of overlooked, or it gets kind of glossed over, to where, again, people are only getting their surface level needs met, when, again, the true value of mentoring is from the deep interactions that you experience.
So I couldn't agree with you more, but I'm going to bring something in that you said earlier. So you opened the can of worms on, I know who I am. I know what privilege I've had.
Hmm.
And one of the things that, me as a founder that I struggle with is making sure that universities understand that this is not a nice to have on the side. That thank God for my father who's in the military. So I have a little bit of a militant background. But I am dead set and laser focused, as I've been called, on making sure that mentorship goes into the curriculum because we are very interested in meeting the middle. I don't worry as much about the top 10%. The top 10% is the top 10% for a reason, right? They've got access to things. They might have privilege like you. And so they're going to be on their way, but we're trying to meet the messy middle. And I was part of the messy middle, middle class kid, first of my generation to go to US university, had parents, one's an immigrant, one's in the military, really at a lack of advising me on what's next after school. But at the same time, cautiously optimistic about what it was that I was going to be able to do to showcase to my younger siblings and to my cousins who were next in line. And
Yeah.
so when it comes to mentorship on campus, probably a couple weeks ago, I was speaking to a VP of development who had a really nice marketing message in his thoughts about we'd like to inspire and not require. Well, I'm all about
Mm.
inspiration for sure. But
Yeah.
I also recognize that despite all of the services that students have available to them on campus, there is a certain level of requirement in order to make sure that we are not missing students. Students that are
Mhm.
seeking, they will find. But there are students that don't even have time to seek. And so we have to go find them. So
Mhm.
how would you speak to, the masses out there that really are trying to keep mentorship as a sideshow as opposed to bringing it into the classroom? And how can you advise me as a founder as to how I can better approach universities to help them recognize that this really should be a part of your curriculum? Help me walk through that a little bit.
Absolutely. So I think mentorship is very closely tied to the concept of leadership. All right. And we know from our studies for years and years and years, the number one most influential thing in the workplace is your relationship with your leader. It's the number one reason people leave their jobs. It is one of the biggest things that explains why it is that people have upward mobility. Leadership and mentorship are, I would argue, the best leaders are also great mentors. And so I think that that's one of the first things to talk about. And when you talk about the idea of the top 10% is going to be fine, and the idea that we want to make sure everybody has an opportunity and things like that. I think you give me too much credit for being quote unquote brave for being privileged or admitting it, right? I have no problem admitting that I'm privileged. That's fine and I have to explain this because I have people that'll look at me funny when I say it in class. And it's like, I don't feel guilty for what I have. I don't feel, like any of my success or whatever, perceived success is diminished because of that. But just the way we talk about with leadership is that when you become a leader, you don't just get power and influence, you also get a big heaping spoonful of responsibility.
Hmm.
right? And so when you talk about people that have had great mentors, when you talk about people that have, you know, done great work, and you mentioned and how you're a first gen student in the US universities, right? Is that you have this sense, and you have this sense of responsibility, right? That it is now your job is to help make the next person's job better, their next life, their next experience better. That's the key. And so, and another thing that you brought up that I want to make sure to point out is this idea of requiring versus inspiring. Yes, I want to inspire. I love inspiring. It's a big part of what I believe, but there has to be some requirement out there, because I think we're also seeing a bigger and bigger disconnect between the idea of what is not required, even if it's something that people know is good for them. People don't
Hmm.
behave rationally, right? And so, I mean, I joke about, I know that eating a Wendy's burger is not good for me, but I still do it, right? It doesn't add up. Okay.
I'm in the car behind you, by the way, at the
Yes,
drive-thru.
right.
Yeah.
But I joke with my students about this. I go, okay, tell me, do you learn more in person or do you learn more online? And they all say unanimously, we learn much more in person. I go, great. Now, how many of you would like an online option for the days you don't feel like coming to our 8 a.m. class? And everybody's hand goes up, right? And so it's like, that it's harder. You know that it's harder to get off your couch and go engage in a social function somewhere out of your house than it is to get onto a group chat, right? You know that. It's better for you, but we still have a hard time doing it. And so that's why I think the responsibility that comes with ascending into leadership positions, becoming mentors, I think is, yes, we can inspire, but even when there is an increasing disconnect between doing what we know is the right thing or the more productive thing, that requirement comes behind and makes sure that everybody is doing it, even if they don't necessarily feel that they're doing it on their own. So, is it better if they were all inspired to do it on their own? Of course it would be. But we also have to be realistic about, there are a lot of opportunities for that to not translate. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and so this leads us into another aspect of who you are, another aspect of what we continue to strive for, and that is outcomes, right? Research, data, and outcomes. So if we are able to move scalable mentorship into position on campus, which we all know requires a collaboration, right? We've
Mhm.
got academic freedom at the professor level. We don't want to burden the professor with any more work. We don't need them to become experts in mentorship, but we also have the people that are in charge of the curriculum and the movement of the university forward. We've got students who are trying to get their diplomas. We've got alumni who want to try to support, and this intersection of all of these people coming together for the benefit of the student is wonderful. And we want to make sure that we are tracking how that looks. So when it comes to the data collection and the adjudication and how we measure our impact, which that's what this is all about, is measuring impact. How should campuses measure and communicate outcomes to the stakeholders? Like, as a researcher, what do you think helps move the needle so that people are like, oh, I see. I now see why we're doing this. What should they be measuring?
Well, I think it depends on what it is that everybody wants to get out of the mentoring process. But and I think that answering that question, what you're going to find is that different people have different priorities. And what I think is important, what I think has been is so interesting to find, is through the data adjudication I've been doing here for the last couple of years, is that when we look at the return on this, it's very easy just to jump to the mentee and look and see, okay, have they diminished their experience of the imposter syndrome? Typically, yes. Have they experienced greater levels of job search self efficacy? Yes. Are they more self aware and recognizing what's important to them and the things that maybe they need to improve upon to ultimately realize their goals? Yes. Right. These are very clear and easy things to see through the data, and the data bear this out. This is an easy thing to see. But when we talk about how do we convince all these stakeholders, is recognizing that the effects of mentoring are so much more far-reaching than just the individual who's the mentoring recipient. Mentors benefit even more from the data that I've seen, the scores are not only stronger, they're more consistent, and that they show things like mentoring self efficacy, things like engagement with the university, willingness to step back and be things like guest speakers, serve on advisory boards, be donors to the university, right? That's an incredible value add to the university. And of course, when you talk about what else are the mentors getting out of this? Well, they're usually representatives of the surrounding community, right?
Mhm.
And so you get a more prepared student, a more confident student, one that doesn't have to suffer from some of those negative and adverse effects of being feeling like a fraud or an imposter. You get people that are actually pursuing their jobs, pursuing career advancement. They're putting forward more advanced, they're advancing more effort and not engaging in things like quiet quitting and things like that, which I know so many people
Yeah.
struggle with, is they recognize, oh, there's value in going above and beyond, right? And so you see that these effects are not limited just to the recipient of the immediate mentoring, the mentor, the university, the surrounding communities, right? Essentially, the rising tide lifts all boats. And so, how do you want to measure this? I think that there's opportunities for some tailoring and customization based off of specific context, right? Maybe the needs at a James Madison are different than at Texas Tech versus at a Marquette, right? We don't know. That's a conversation to be had with each institution. But I think the theme though is that the magnitude of the impact is affecting so many stakeholders, and again, making that so much more central is only going to intensify the positive outcomes.
Yeah, I love multiplying the power of the win. So you've highlighted the fact that whether it's the mentee, which is the obvious winner, the
Mm,
mentor, which I'm so glad you brought them into it because of all the work that you do with leadership, the university, in the give back from the mentors, the communities. You are a recruiter, so it's so nice when recruiters can finally get somebody who is better prepared for the next
mhm.
step in their life because they're well adjusted. They've had these mentors in their life. So yeah, so this is a multiplication of that power, which
Yeah.
is really powerful. So what would an ideal ecosystem of mentorship look like at institutions if they really want to support the student, especially the historically underserved populations? What does that need to look like for you? You manage to, the leadership there, you've got the students, you're in research, you're touching a lot of different aspects. What's that ecosystem need to look like for this to win?
So, and this is not just because it is a shameless plug for Turn, but
Although, thank you. We always love
yes,
that. That's wonderful.
right. But I think it's the coordination, right? I think it's the idea, y- you know, when you talk to mentors and recruiting them, most people aren't going to come stick up an objection because they say, I, I don't want to help the student, right? And mentees aren't going to say things like, I don't want any help, right? Or, institutions aren't going to say things like mentoring isn't important, right? That's never the thing, right? When we talk about, I teach some continuing ed classes on time management. Time isn't wasted or we don't have leaks of time. Time doesn't disappear. It's just invested in areas that aren't as ROI heavy, right? We just spend our time on things that don't necessarily generate as much value.
True.
And so when we talk about this among the team-based literature, we call this coordination loss, right? As soon as you have so many people and you're spending more time doing things like, okay, do we want to jump on a Zoom? Do we want to, okay, everybody have this, pass the document this way? What's our interdependence look like? How are we going to coordinate and work together? I think that what Turn does so well is it really cuts down on that coordination loss. It lets people know that, hey, we know that these individuals are being matched to the best possible person where we're going to see the best possible value come out of this relationship. We know that there is a centralized place that this can happen. We know that when we're investing our time in this, it's not being wasted, right? And so we know that the effectiveness is there, but so is the efficiency because as you know, we've talked about the day and age and everything where time is the ultimate currency. I think that resistance is oftentimes based on I want to help, but I don't have the time. I want to do this, but I'm not sure the best way to do it. If you can provide a template, a prototype, here's a, evidence to show we know this works. I've done this in the past. I think that is something that is so much more enticing to people to make that work. So for me, I think if you're going to put me in charge of this, I think the biggest thing is there has to be a coordination to make sure that everybody's time, effort, energy, their expertise, it is something that is being utilized effectively and efficiently. And so to me, I think that's the biggest thing that I would have in terms of driving those things together.
That's so well said, and I did not know that you taught a time management class. I wanna be somebody who sits in that because people ask me all the time, and I'm sure I can take some tidbits out of what you say as to what we can do with our 168, right?
Yeah.
168 hours in a week, we all use it a little
Yep.
differently, so how can we streamline that? Yeah,
Yep.
it is really about coordination. I'm so fortunate, Dan, to work with people like you because, I call you all pioneer innovators. I'm often asked by, potential investors or, venture capitalists or whomever, I run into from an entrepreneurship standpoint, and they're always asking me, what's your ICP? What's your ideal customer profile? And I don't have a specific title. I can't say, oh, it's the dean or it's the professor or it's the adjunct or it's the career services person. It's just somebody who cares and somebody who is a pioneer innovator and wants to collaborate. So thank you
Yeah.
for talking about that collaboration piece. And yes, we will
Oh, of
do
course.
everything we can to help with the air support and make that lift as minimal as possible. So
Of
my
course.
last bits for you are what advice would you give to students who feel like imposters since you once were one? What would you like to
Sure.
say to those students?
It's a normal feeling. Everybody that just about everybody that you maybe look up to, they've all experienced it. Remember, you're only seeing everybody's highlight reel in today's day and age. You're not seeing their struggle, their
So
work,
true.
their setbacks, their obstacles, and hard things are hard, right? If you're feeling like this, there's a reason that you think other people are thinking more highly of you. And it's probably because you've earned it. It's probably because you've done something worthy of that kind of an expectation and that kind of a perception. And so you should view it as an opportunity to meet that expectation and to continue to strive, not necessarily as a hindrance that something is going to those expectations that you worked hard to build up in your own, according to your own accord. These are things that you're doing something right if you're feeling this way, right? If you're feeling uncomfortable, you're growing, right? There is discomfort in that experience, and don't let it be something where you take the seat away from yourself from the table. Make somebody else take it from you.
Awesome. I hope everybody heard that. I hope every student, anybody who's experiencing imposter syndrome heard that. All right, what about for faculty and staff who want to be better mentors? What advice would you give to them?
It's a little bit of the golden rule, right? It's the idea that, look, you were once on the other side of the desk, right? Try to remember how you felt. Try to remember what you needed, right? Just a little bit of empathy for what's going on with this person, and know that maybe the challenges that they're experiencing that maybe aren't as readily apparent to you, recognize that the challenges also might be a little bit different. They might be presenting themselves differently today. And so understand that you're not where you are because entirely on your own. You are not where you're at purely on your own effort and your own accord. It is something where somewhere along the way, someone extended you a hand. And you may not change the world through this mentoring, but you can change someone's world. Okay. So take it seriously.
That's legacy living to change just one person's world. I couldn't agree with you more. So, for our listeners who for sure are going to want to follow you, they're going to want to look more into your work. They're going to ask me about this book, and I'll get that information from you later. But how can they reach out to you and learn more about your work? What's the best way to do that?
Sure. So with me taking a new job, I don't have the new setup and everything for all the email addresses and stuff just yet. Hopefully those credentials come soon, but I will have my LinkedIn page. You can find me on there for sure. And then depending on when this comes out, if you simply Google me, I'm sure you'll find me on Marquette's page somewhere with all the up-to-date contact information. And if you want to see more the research that I've been involved with a lot of great people, I also have a Google Scholar page. And you can find me there too.
Oh, that's great. So I hope everybody looks Dan up because he's, as you can tell, a wealth of knowledge. This has been a absolutely fantastic talk. Who knew you were an introvert? I've always said introverts are some of my favorite people because they do a lot of the listening and therefore they do a lot of the learning. And as you can see from Dan's feedback on this Turn Talks, you can see how much learning he has done on his time on this earth. He has definitely spent his 168 very well every single week. Marquette is so lucky to have you, Dan. We are very fortunate to be partnered with you in learning more about the research, certainly in the imposter syndrome. Cannot thank you enough. For those of you who are interested, we're going to be launching Turn Talks on all the major streaming services. Check us out at turnmentoring.com. And I hope you all have a great day. We'll see you on the next Turn Talks. Thanks, everyone, for listening.
Thank you for listening to Turn Talks. To learn more about our robust mentoring platform, visit us at turnmentoring.com. Join us next time for more enlightening conversations.